I'm Natalia O'Sullivan, and I am the co-author of the Ancestral Continuum. This book is based on a lot of the work that I have done over the last 20 years with clients and workshops, which is created really with anecdotes, stories, and workshop material in the book to help people recognise the significance of knowing who they are is connected with their family history. My father's passing was one of the most, I would say, traumatic events in my life. He was always a very strong character, and we had a very interesting kind of relationship. I always felt very loved by him and very understood. And he allowed me very much to be my rebel self, you could say, my individual personality, and I always respected him for that. And what happened was about 6 years ago, I had a friend of mine who passed recently, and he came to me in a dream. And in this dream, it was the eve of his funeral, and he spoke to me about the fact that he said to me, I'm moving on now, and you won't see me again. But before I go, I just want to tell you that your father has cancer and you have to take him to the hospital, or to the doctors. Sorry, you have to take him to the doctors. So I then fell back to sleep again, and this friend Neil kept coming back to me, and he said, look, I have to leave. And I could see all this light around him. And I thought, why am I dreaming about Neil? And why is he telling me? I'm not sure. He said, no, this is true. I promise you. You must go. You will ring the doctors. You go round to your father's in the morning and you will take him there. I agreed. He disappeared. I had never felt or heard from him since. The next day, I took my father to the doctors, forced him, and he had advanced cancer. He hadn't even noticed that he'd been ill, and he said to me he hadn't felt quite right. So that was the beginning of this quite traumatic journey. And so that was February, and by July, he had already passed. And so this rapid movement, and this was the first, what's very interesting when you lose a parent or lose someone very close to you, you do feel like you're in a very strange, you're grieving as you're going through the process, not just after they pass, but while they're passing. And it takes a lot of courage to stay very strong and to connect with that person as they're moving out of their physical life. And so I spent a lot of time with him. And what was very interesting, he sort of gently shut down as he was dying. And he didn't want to talk about his past and his family history. Again, another very interesting character. He came over from Hungary during the uprising in 1956. His family hadn't heard from him for years after he moved away, and he was 18 years old, because he was scared about being taken back to Hungary and not being allowed out. So there was a lot of kind of missing family history that he never wanted to talk about. So when he was dying in hospital, which was very interesting, and I was giving him some healing to stop him being very agitated, he started to speak to us in Hungarian. And he kept seeing all his family was shouting them in Hungarian, telling him to go and leave him alone. And it was quite an experience. My mum said, I've never seen him like this. And I said, I think he's making peace with something that happened. And I feel his ancestors have come to help him. And so on his last night, he actually became much more peaceful, and then he passed. Now, what's interesting, I've always felt straight after his death that because he didn't know that he was dying, he was very caught up with having an illness that suddenly came. He got septicemia, so he went into this sort of semi-coma. So there wasn't this kind of being able to gradually pass away. He felt like it was a rapid, fast-moving train, and then he wasn't in his body anymore. So for 3 nights after he passed, which is the most powerful time when a soul leaves a body, he kept coming to me in dreams. And I kept hearing him calling me and saying, why has this happened? And I have to say, I was very upset and very scared every time he came. And I kept trying to say to him that he wasn't in his body anymore. And so I think he had post-traumatic death disorder, if there's such a thing. And so what's interesting is I knew that I had to do some more connecting work. So I built an altar for him. I lit candles. And the Tibetan Buddhists say for 49 days after someone passes, that is the most powerful time where you have to kind of remember that person. You have to talk about them. You have to grieve them. You have to tell them they can go. That you have to just show them that you love them. And what's interesting is when a child's born, there's this 6 weeks after the child's born that both the mother and the child need to kind of connect and bringing the child into the physical body. It's the same thing when someone passes into spirit. And so I realised that he was never going to be settled as in his passing without having that connection with Hungary. And so we were allowed to take a little bit of his ashes, which I kept in a box. And it actually took us 3 years after he passed for us to return to Hungary. And we went along to the family, and they were so happy that you could say, bring him home. Because about a month before he passed, he did ring his sister to say, I'm coming back. But he died before he could. We had this funeral ceremony for him, which is so wonderful because the graveyard is at the top of the village. And so we all walked up like a procession, all my cousins, his cousins, my auntie, her husband, and it was just amazing. So we surrounded the family grave where his parents had been buried, and we placed him inside the grave and did a blessing. And, I dreamt of him that night, and I could see him. He was all full of smiles and this light that was with him, and I knew that he could just make peace with his life. And after that, his dreams got less and less of him coming to me. But all I ever feel from him is this great love now. And his family have also been able to make peace with having lost a sibling, really, and a son from that time. What's interesting is that we never think about our own death until, one, we get much older and everyone's dying around us. So let's say we're in our 70s and 80s, we start losing family and friends. But what's also very interesting is when you become a parent yourself, or your siblings are having children, you suddenly realise that you are part of a generation that is kind of moving on, and eventually we become an ancestor ourselves. Whether we have children or not, we are still part of that generational connection with that family tree. And one of the things I always recommend people to think about is not just, writing your will and who you want to leave your things to, but also how you would like to be remembered. And I think while we're sort of given the opportunity to have many years in front of us, what's interesting, some of those opportunities that we're given that we perhaps not always allow ourselves, whether we want to go bungee jumping or learn to be a pilot or actually want to honour the work that we do. We want to be able to pass that, you could say, that memory. And one of the things that people have talked about is getting a box and putting inside the box photographs of yourselves, little stories, letters, things that you made as a child, things that you want to leave behind, jewellery. So there's sort of what I call a legacy box that actually has this whole energy of who you are. And what we forget often to do is to realise because we work so hard and we're always busy, we actually forget that moment that this whole life that we're having will be remembered at some point. And having that pause, doing a little moment for yourselves is really powerful, because you've got to realise that those that come after you will want to remember you, and they will see things in you that you perhaps haven't seen, like your great courage, the amount of work, your generosity, your care, your time that you spend with your family. All of those things are really significant in leaving a legacy behind. So your energy, your attitude, your spirit, your creativity actually does pass down through the family tree.